Story 1. The Vanishing Delivery. Jake had been a courier for 5 years. He preferred the night shifts, less traffic, fewer customers asking him to wait while they signed receipts, and a little extra pay. Tonight's shift was no different, or so he thought, until the final delivery appeared on his route. The instructions were bizarre. Deliver to Blackwood Manor at midnight. Do not open the package. Do not be late. It wasn't the strangest job he'd seen, but the specificity of the time and location made him uneasy. He glanced at the package, a plain brown box sealed with heavy black tape. It felt unusually light, as if it were empty. Easy money, Jake muttered, trying to shake off his nerves. The drive to Blackwood Manor took him to the outskirts of town, where the city lights faded, replaced by dense, moonlit woods. The GPS struggled to maintain a signal, rerouting him down unmarked roads. His van rattled over gravel as the forest grew denser, the trees like skeletal hands reaching toward the sky. Finally, he arrived. Blackwood Manor loomed before him, its silhouette stark against the foggy night. The house was enormous, its grandeur long eroded by time. Ivy snaked up its cracked walls and broken windows gaped like empty eye sockets. Jake killed the engine and stepped out, the package under his arm. The air was colder here, unnaturally so. Jake's breath clouded in front of him as he approached the rusted iron gate. A sudden chime made him jump. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Leave it at the gate and go. Do not enter the house." Jake hesitated. The instructions were clear, but curiosity itched at him. He glanced at the package again. What could possibly be inside? Against his better judgment, he peeled away the black tape. Inside was a photograph. It was old, sepia-toned, and slightly frayed at the edges. The image showed a family, a man, woman, and 2 children, posing stiffly in front of Blackwood Manor. Jake's heart froze when he noticed something impossible. He was in the photo, standing behind the family. His face was unmistakable, though he didn't remember ever being there. A gust of wind howled through the trees, and the gate creaked open. The front door of the manor swung ajar with a low groan, as if inviting him in. Jake's instincts screamed at him to leave, but his feet moved forward, drawn by some unseen force. Inside, the house was eerily silent. Dust floated in the air, illuminated by moonlight streaming through broken windows. The ornate furniture was draped in tattered sheets, and the walls were adorned with faded portraits of grim-faced individuals. Each face seemed to watch him as he moved deeper into the house. His phone buzzed again. "Turn back. It's not too late." Ignoring the message, Jake followed the sound of faint whispers echoing from upstairs. The staircase groaned under his weight as he ascended, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as he reached the 2nd floor. A door at the end of the hallway was slightly ajar. Light flickered from within. Jake approached cautiously, his pulse hammering in his ears. He pushed the door open and froze. The room was a study, filled with dusty bookshelves and a massive oak desk. On the desk lay the same photograph he had found in the package. But now, the image had changed. The family was gone, leaving only Jake's likeness, standing alone in front of the house. A shadow moved in the corner of the room. Jake spun around, his flashlight trembling in his hand. A figure emerged from the darkness, a tall, gaunt man in a tattered suit, his eyes sunken and lifeless. "You shouldn't have come," the man rasped, his voice like dry leaves. Jake backed away, but the door slammed shut behind him. The man stepped closer, his bony hand outstretched. Shadows pooled around him, writhing like living things. Panicking, Jake bolted past the man, shoving him aside. He tore down the hallway, the whispers now a deafening roar. The house seemed to shift around him, the walls closing in, doors disappearing. He stumbled down the stairs and out the front door, gasping for air. His van was gone. The driveway was empty, and the road he had come from was now a dense wall of trees. Jake's phone buzzed again. This time the message read, "You can't leave. You belong to the house now." Desperation gripped him as he sprinted into the woods. The trees seemed endless, twisting and looping back on themselves. Hours passed, or was it minutes, before he stumbled back to the manor. It was as if the forest itself had guided him back. Exhausted, Jake collapsed on the porch. The door creaked open once more, and he was too weak to resist as the shadows spilled out, enveloping him. When the police arrived the next morning, they found Jake's van parked neatly at the edge of the forest. The keys were still in the ignition, and the package sat unopened on the passenger seat. There was no sign of Jake. Blackwood Manor, which local authorities insisted had been demolished decades ago, was nowhere to be found. Story 2. The Endless Route. Mia was a part-time delivery driver juggling her shifts to support her dream of becoming a writer. Her route that night was ordinary enough until her dispatcher assigned her one last job, a package for Mr. H. Eternity. The address was vague, simply labeled as End of the Road. She hesitated, frowning at the cryptic destination. "Is this a prank?" she muttered to herself. "No pranks," her dispatcher replied over the radio. "But if you're uncomfortable, I can reassign it." Mia hated backing out. "I'll take it," she said firmly, marking the job as in progress. Little did she know this decision would change her life forever. The package was a plain, rectangular box, heavier than it looked. Its weight was odd, shifting slightly as though the contents were alive. Mia set it in the passenger seat and followed her GPS out of the city. The fog that night was thicker than she'd ever seen, curling like smoke around her van. Her GPS rerouted itself several times, struggling to maintain a signal. She passed through increasingly desolate areas, abandoned gas stations, fields of dead crops, and houses with boarded-up windows. Finally, after what felt like hours, she saw a faint light in the distance. Her GPS dinged, announcing, "You have arrived." Mia slowed her van to a crawl. At the end of the road, perched on a jagged cliff, was a house. It was unlike anything she'd ever seen, a patchwork of mismatched architecture, as if someone had built it from salvaged pieces of other homes. A single lantern hung above the front door, casting a flickering glow. She parked the van and grabbed the package. The air was unnaturally still, and the ocean below the cliff was eerily silent, its surface like black glass. Mia approached the door and knocked. The sound echoed far too loudly, as though the house were hollow inside. No one answered. "Delivery for Mr. H. Eternity?" she called out, her voice trembling slightly. Still, no response. Shrugging, she set the package on the porch and turned to leave. As she did, the sound of a door creaking open made her freeze. Slowly, she turned back. The door was ajar, revealing a dimly lit hallway that seemed to stretch on forever. Against her better judgment, Mia stepped inside. "Hello?" she called, her voice swallowed by the oppressive silence. The package was still in her hands. She wasn't sure why she'd picked it up again. The hallway was lined with dozens of identical packages, each one labeled with different names and dates. Mia's heart raced as she realized the most recent package bore her own name. Mia W. Deliver by midnight. Her phone buzzed. She looked down to see a message from her dispatcher. "Mia, don't take the Eternity route. Drivers never return." A cold chill swept through her. "What the hell is this?" she whispered, backing away. But the door she had entered through was no longer there. In its place was a blank wall. The sound of footsteps echoed from deeper within the house. Mia spun around, clutching the package like a shield. The steps grew louder, heavier, until a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a man, tall and skeletal, with unnaturally long limbs and a face that seemed stretched, as though the skin were barely containing something beneath. His eyes were hollow sockets, yet they seemed to bore into her. "You're late," he rasped, his voice like dry leaves. "The package was for you." Mia's mind reeled. "I don't understand. What do you want?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he extended his hand, and the package in her arms grew heavier, its weight pressing down on her until she dropped it. The box hit the floor and burst open, spilling its contents. Mia gasped. Inside were photographs, hundreds of them. Each one showed a different courier, their faces twisted in expressions of terror. Among them, she saw her own face, pale and lifeless. "No," she whispered, stumbling back. "This isn't real." The man grinned, revealing rows of jagged teeth. "It's very real. You took the route. Now you belong to the house." Mia bolted, her footsteps echoing through the endless hallway. Every turn led her back to the same room, where the man stood waiting, his grin growing wider each time. The walls began to close in, the air growing colder and heavier. Desperate, she tried to smash through a window, but the glass wouldn't break. The man approached, his shadow stretching impossibly long. "You can't escape," he said, "but you can deliver." Before she could react, he lunged at her, his skeletal hands gripping her shoulders. The world around her spun, and everything went black. When Mia woke up, she was standing on the porch, holding a new package. The address on it was different. To the next courier. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. Her reflection in the lantern's glass revealed her eyes, once bright, were now hollow voids. She watched helplessly as her van disappeared down the road, driven by a new courier who had just taken the job. The door creaked open behind her, and she turned, her feet moving, of their own accord, as she stepped back into the house. The lantern flickered out, and the cliff was silent once more. Story 3: The Wrong Door. Liam was a seasoned delivery driver who prided himself on never missing a deadline, no matter how strange the request. That evening, he was tasked with delivering a large wooden crate to an apartment complex downtown. The address seemed ordinary enough, except for one detail. The apartment number was listed as 13113. Liam chuckled nervously when he saw it. "Guess someone's not superstitious," he muttered, loading the heavy crate into his van. The dispatcher hadn't mentioned anything unusual, but the job came with specific instructions. Deliver directly to the apartment. Do not leave the crate unattended. The building, Greystone Towers, loomed against the evening sky, its Gothic architecture casting jagged shadows across the street. The lobby was eerily empty. Liam approached the elevator and pressed the button for the 13th floor. The panel didn't light up. Confused, he checked the job details again. "Apartment 1313, he muttered. The concierge, an elderly man with a peculiar grin, noticed Liam's struggle. "The 13th floor, the concierge said, his voice raspy, "is special. Press 12 twice and you'll get there." Liam frowned. "What kind of building does that?" The concierge didn't answer. Instead, he gave a slow, deliberate nod and walked away. With a shrug, Liam followed the instructions. The elevator lurched, groaning as it ascended, the lights flickering intermittently. When it finally stopped, the doors opened to reveal a dimly lit hallway that seemed far older than the rest of the building. The air was thick, carrying the faint scent of mildew and something metallic. The wallpaper was peeling, and the carpet squelched slightly under his boots, damp for reasons he didn't want to investigate. Room 1313 was at the end of the hall. Its door was cracked, as though someone had tried to kick it in or claw their way out. Liam knocked hesitantly. "Delivery for 1313, he called. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. The crate felt heavier in his arms, and his muscles ached from holding it. Finally, the door creaked open, seemingly on its own. The room beyond was dark, but a faint orange glow flickered from somewhere inside, like candlelight. Liam stepped in cautiously, setting the crate down just inside the door. "Anyone home?" he asked, his voice echoing unnaturally. The door slammed shut behind him, and he spun around, his heart pounding. He tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The glow brightened, illuminating the room. It was a large study, its walls lined with bookshelves filled with leather-bound tomes. A massive oak desk dominated the center, and above it hung a portrait of a man with piercing eyes and a grim expression. Liam felt those eyes following him as he moved, though the man in the painting never seemed to change position. He turned back to the crate. The black wax seal on its lid had melted, as though the crate had been sitting near a fire. Smoke curled faintly from the edges. "What the hell?" Liam muttered, leaning closer. Before he could touch it, a deep voice echoed from behind him. "You opened the door." Liam froze. He hadn't seen anyone when he entered, and the voice didn't sound human. It was guttural, distorted, as if spoken from the bottom of a deep well. Slowly he turned around. A figure stood in the shadows. It was tall, unnaturally so, its head nearly brushing the ceiling. Its face was obscured, but Liam could feel its gaze, cold and predatory. "You shouldn't be here," it said. "This isn't your delivery." The words sent chills down Liam's spine. "I was just following instructions," he stammered. "The crate, someone ordered it. I'm just the driver." The figure stepped closer, its form flickering like a bad television signal. "The delivery wasn't for you, but now you've taken the wrong door." The crate began to shake violently. Liam backed away as the lid flew off, and a torrent of shadows erupted from within. They swirled around the room, whispering unintelligible words. The air grew colder, and the shadows began to coalesce into forms, twisted, humanoid figures with empty eyes and gaping mouths. Liam ran to the door, pounding on it. "Let me out!" he shouted. The doorknob burned his hand when he tried to turn it, and the shadows began to close in, their whispers growing louder. One of them lunged at him, its icy fingers grazing his arm. Pain shot through him, and he looked down to see his veins darkening, the blackness spreading like ink. Panic overtook him as he realized the shadows weren't just trying to scare him, they were trying to claim him. The figure in the shadows watched silently as Liam's struggles grew weaker. "You were warned," it said. "You opened the door, now you'll stay." When Liam woke, he was sitting at the oak desk. The room was silent again, the shadows gone. His head throbbed, and he felt an unbearable weight in his chest. He looked down at his hands and gasped. They weren't his hands anymore. They were pale, bony, and cold. He caught his reflection in a dusty mirror on the wall. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken and lifeless. He looked exactly like the man in the portrait. Liam tried to scream, but no sound came out. The door creaked open, and a new courier stepped into the room, carrying a package. He looked young, nervous, and completely unaware of what was about to happen. Liam felt his body move, though he didn't will it. He stood, his new skeletal frame moving stiffly as he approached the courier. The young man froze, staring at him in terror. "You opened the door," Liam heard himself say, his voice no longer his own. "You shouldn't have come."